Leia Healthcare, looking after you always. Proud sponsors of Real Health with Karl Henry.
Hello and welcome to Real Health with me, Karl Henry, in association with Leia Healthcare. Folks, for this week's show, who doesn't need a bit more positivity in their lives right now between COVID, lockdowns, Trump and the US election, Christmas, and what 2021 is going to have in store for us? It can be hard to keep your spirits up and your focus on the positive that is still out there. In the same way, you've got to build up a good exercise habit and good food habits. You also have to build a good positive mental habit as well. Just how you can do this and how it will expand and benefit your life even more. Well, this week's guest, Fiona Brennan, is a clinical hypnotherapist, best-selling author, TedX speaker, and mental health expert on Today FM. And she joins me with lots of great tips and advice on developing your positive mental habit. Fiona, welcome to Real Health. How are you?
I'm great, Karl. Thank you so much for having me. Delighted to be here.
It's great to have you on. First and foremost, how's life? How are you? How have you been finding kind of the lockdown and COVID?
Yeah, I'm really good, Karl, I have to say. And what I would say is that it's not by chance that I'm really good. It's a lot of practicing what I preach. And I've really noticed that in the last few months, since the whole, uncertainty arose for globally back in February, March of this year, I've really noticed just how important it is, Karl, to up the ante in terms of looking after our minds. So I've done a huge amount of work in terms of my own mental health, which is very good, anyway, but I've really been particularly working on it because I've had to really help a lot of clients along the journey. And I'm seeing so many things that are really, really tough for people. So in order, I always go back to the self in terms of how can I get myself in the best frame of mind so that I'm there for my clients, for my family, for my friends, for my son, et cetera, et cetera. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm doing good, but I'd say, again, I just think it's so important that when people say, oh my God, how are you coping so well? It's like, well, it's the work and the effort and the time that I put into my own mental health that actually allows me to be here today and say, do you know what, actually, yes, authentically, genuinely, 100%, I'm doing really well. So thanks for asking. How are you?
Well, even those who are positive, the best of times, we've never been challenged more than ever before over the course of the last kind of 6, 7, 8 months or so. And of course, trying to be positive for everybody else and for your family and for your work colleagues and for your friends. The reality is, if you're not practicing some kind of self-care or some kind of positive habit routine yourself, it's very difficult to be positive for everybody else, and you'll crash and burn eventually.
Totally, Karl. I wouldn't just say it's very difficult. I'd say it's impossible. I'd say it's actually, you're not going to be there for people in the way that you need to be. And especially when you are a therapist or you're in a caring industry, then, that even means it's more necessary to dig deep, if you like. And I think, and I'm sure you've heard it before, a lot of people are saying how they've had the opportunity to reflect in many ways. The pace of life so much slower, etc. And that does open the door for that deep inner work, which I think is something we can all benefit from. So I've certainly been doing some more of that myself, and that I found that really has helped me to be present and to be positive, but positive, I think, and I think it's so important to define what positivity is. And I would say that essentially it is one of the most positive things we can do, quite ironically, Karl, is to feel negative emotions. That it's essential for us to be able to go through the very uncomfortable feeling of whether it's anxiety, whether it's, stress, sadness, grief, and there's been a huge amount of that in the last 6 months. So really it's sitting with those emotions and tolerating them within ourselves that allows us to do that for the people we love, because we're not so frightened by them. We're able to see that when we get closer to an emotion, the very thing that we want to happen is it starts to happen itself naturally, as it dissolves and sort of eases through our own loving attention. So that's something I work on with myself, and then again, of course, with my clients.
Okay, so it's not about hiding emotions or running away from emotions, and especially those that people would see as being negative, such as, as like you said, grief, loss, worry, concern, anxiety, all the kind of common things people have been feeling over the last while. It's important to reflect on them and to deal with them.
Absolutely, yeah, it really is. And how we deal with them is the very first step, is acceptance. And when when I say that to clients, there's always ironically resistance, because they come to me with the desire to feel better, and then when I ask them, well, okay, before we can get to that place, I really need you to work with this idea of accepting whatever is there within you now. And that can be actually the hardest step for people. It's sort of counterintuitive, because when we feel like, if I just accept this, then I'm giving up. I'm just kind of giving up and resigning to the situation. But the opposite is true. And what I find really useful, Karl, is just a simple metaphor is, if somebody's walking down the road and, they're looking to come and visit you in your gym, and somebody taps them on the shoulder and they say, "You're looking for Karl?" And they say, "Yeah." And you say, "Well, you're heading in the wrong direction." And they refuse to accept that. Well, they're never going to actually get to their desired result. So just really simply that acceptance within ourselves, the acceptance that, yes, I do feel really anxious. Yes, I do feel really uneasy about this. Yes, I am uncomfortable with uncertainty. That then allows the very thing to start to happen, which is we can start to move forward from that. And it's really a platform, it's a platform for progress, I would say. And in my work, Karl, I meet a lot of kind of very high achieving type of people. And they would quite often put a lot of pressure on themselves. It's sort of that sense of, in order to achieve, I must have pressure. And it comes from years ago, maybe, at school or sports teams, etc. And they bring it into their adulthood. And it's so unsustainable that the older we get, the less we perform well under pressure. And the more we perform well under compassion and understanding and patience with ourselves. And that is so much at the heart of the work I do, is helping people to actually be kinder to themselves. I mean, it's quite shocking and quite revealing to be in a therapy room for years and years and just see these wonderful, beautiful people being really hard on themselves. People that others would deem, externally successful, and yet have an internal, very self-critical voice. So I work with that voice in terms of accepting that part of ourselves and loving that part of ourselves, as opposed to fearing it, or as opposed to just wanting to be rid of it, or ignoring it, or escaping from it, which are all, very common sort of coping mechanisms with these parts of ourselves that we find difficult.
And it's fair to say that as a nation, we're particularly bad at loving ourselves. Would that be fair to say?
It would, Karl, and you know what? It's quite fitting here, because the title of my next book is The Self-Love Habit. So I focus really in on this, and that's probably why this conversation is flowing the way it is, because it's been in my head so much in terms of the importance of loving ourselves and what that is. And again, there's so many misunderstandings of it being something as selfish or narcissistic, which even you can understand that, because as soon as you say it, like self-love, oh, I love myself. And when we were younger, oh, she loves herself, it's this idea of vanity, etc. But, and I think it is that is, the tides are changing with that. But at heart, it is the most selfless thing you can do. And that is the message in my book. But when you love yourself, and that is a very deep understanding and self-knowledge of yourself, you are then in this position to really actually not just make the people around you brighter and happier and more positive, but the world a better place. The world becomes more caring, more loving, more, you have the energy that you need to help different people. So if you walk past somebody who's suffering, who's homeless, who's in difficulty, you actually have the ability to feel the empathy for them and to have a desire to help them, but not so much that it overrides or that you start to get caught up with yourself again in terms of, oh, isn't the world a terrible place? And now we're into more negative energy. So it's really loving the self so that we can move beyond the self. And that is, something that is so essential, I think, in the times we're living through, is that there is that energy that's starting to move us towards collaboration and really joining together and seeing how interdependent we really are. And I think that is becoming more and more clear as time goes on, and certainly in the pandemic, we can see that, how interdependent we are. My behavior has an impact on your behavior, and so forth.
And on a very basic level, I know from my own experience, when I put some time aside for myself and prioritize, my own training, for example, or my guitar lesson or whatever that may be, that on a basic level, loving yourself can be putting aside 30 minutes, 60 minutes for something that you love to do and immersing yourself in that. And that kind of, so on a very basic level of self-care, that's a really easy way for people to start.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it has to be that sense of it's not a luxury, it's a necessity. So when you go off and you do your, I hope at least an hour of guitar, not 30 minutes, you need a good hour there to get into it. And that is actually a selfless act in itself, because when you come back, when you're with your kids after that time, your energy will have shifted into one that is much calmer, much more connected. And that's the gift that you give, by taking the time for yourself. You transform your own energy into something that is very beautiful to be around for people. So on a practical level, absolutely, it's this idea that it's not just if I have time, it's like this is 100% a necessity, and then I'm going to be in that place where I can actually really give with value and listen to people. Which I think is a skill that you're very good at, Karl. But it's something that we all need to practice. And when we're listening to our own selves and our own hearts, we are then in a really good position to actually listen to others without our own sort of agenda coming through or our own conditioning coming through.
And one of the things for long-term change, I know from your own opinion, you say that it should be made on a subconscious level. So tell me a little bit more about that, what that actually means.
Yeah, Karl. Well, I'm a clinical hypnotherapist, so hypnotherapy is at the heart, again, of my work. And personally speaking, like I went through, my own sort of journey, as we all have, and I think you'll find a lot of people in the caring professions have, suffered themselves in different ways. So I would have had really chronic anxiety for a huge part of my earlier life, my childhood and my early adulthood. And I did a lot of, psychotherapy, talking therapy, which I found very useful. And then I started to explore the whole world of hypnotherapy. And I would say on a personal level, that's kind of what took me from sort of, being okay, my mental health being in a reasonably good place, certainly not as anxious anymore, into this much higher realm of joy, of happiness, of progress, of self-belief. And that is because hypnotherapy works on a subconscious level. So I've seen this transformation, so many times with my clients well, and it's just incredible to see, because what we're doing is we're quietening down the conscious mind. So right now, as we're chatting, Karl, like our conscious minds are still, they're still aware of what's coming later in the afternoon. Is it raining? Are we going to get out for a walk? All of these things will go through our conscious mind. But in order for really good, permanent, sustainable, lasting change, we want to get into the subconscious. And hypnotherapy is a very useful tool for doing that. It's really, the way I like to describe it is an honest placebo. So we're not pretending it's anything else. We're not saying this is a pill and then you're going to feel better, or you're going to, do this and this will happen. It's simply allowing people to see the power of their own minds through quietening down the conscious mind. So it's not a million miles from meditation. People often ask, what's the difference? Well, the difference is that meditation is like, again, I like to think of it as a door that opens up in terms of being present, of being still. And once we have that door, once we have the conscious mind quiet and relaxed, we could then move into the imagination. So, you've probably heard about the power of visualization, mental rehearsals, etc. And that's where you're really training your brain to experience something in a way that you desire. So it's very specifically tailored towards an outcome. With meditation, with mindfulness, which I'm a huge advocate of as well, it is much more so this idea of keeping present, which is incredibly important. But then let's launch into whether it's going forward. So it could be, for example, I do a lot of work with people who are, have nerves around public speaking, presenting. So I can help that person to actually go forth, do their presentation to the most amazing and best possibility that they can, the capacity that they have in their imagination. And when the time comes, it's like, I've done this before, to the very detail, to the sort of aroma in the room, to the feel of the seat that you're sitting on, to the people that are there. So it's a very incredibly powerful tool that we can use. And then again, you can use it to go back. So if somebody's got trauma or difficulties in their past, it doesn't even have to be trauma, but anything that, you know, let's say with that example of the presenting, that they had an experience where they felt, you know, it went really badly and they forgot what they were saying and they froze, and lots of people can experience that. You can go back and you can start to kind of reframe that for them so it doesn't feel as intense, so that they're not bringing the past into the present and then into the future. So, you know, I just find that it's an incredibly joyful, wonderful tool that we all have access to. And I can see the benefit it's had in my own life over the years. You know, I visualized my first book coming out and it's out and there it is. I visualized it in the top 10 in Irish Times bestsellers. There it is. So, you know, it's incredibly sort of encouraging and just to know that we have that capacity within us, you know, that we can imagine something, we can create it and we can believe it. And the science behind that is that it's actually changing our brains in terms of the neuroplasticity. Our brains are literally being rewired. Rick Hansen, whom I trained with, you may have heard of him or not, but he says that neurons that fire together wire together. So the idea that we are literally, you know, changing. If you could see the brain, you would see it be fitter and stronger, and that is through repetition. So a lot of hypnotherapy is repetition, which is why, for example, in my books, the audio aspect is a huge part of it. So as much as the reader is reading the book, I always say, please, please, please listen to the morning and the nighttime audios that come with the book, because they work on the subconscious level. What you're reading is conscious, and then what you're listening to is subconscious.
So, in terms of that kind of the vision component, and I suppose that's where the likes of vision boards and things come from. It's taking things out of your head and you can then visually see them. So a simple tip for our listeners may be to dream those dreams and see themselves. And I totally got, when I started out my career, was I'm into cars, and it was a Mini Cooper S, and it was a particular color, and I could vision myself driving it, and all of these processes. And, you know, lo and behold, a couple of years later, I was driving the Mini that I totally get that. For me, I like to identify it and make it visual and surround myself with it in my diary or at my desk. And that kind of vision boarding can be a really good tool or accessory to go along with that kind of that mental attitude.
Yes, it is, because every time you see it is a subconscious reminder. So we don't realize just how powerful the subconscious is in terms of the more often you see something, the more that you're actually then starting to subconsciously seek that out in the world. And that works on the positive, but it also works on the negative. And the negative is quite often unconscious. So people are unconsciously sort of responding to negative triggers within their lives. And that's what's really unfortunate and really sad, is that there isn't that awareness. So awareness is just hugely important, which brings us back to the whole area of mindfulness being the door, if you like, to open up. Because how can you even, if you're not aware that you even believe that you can have this Mini Cooper, for example, how are you going to put a picture up or to visualize it? So creating the awareness that you, first of all, deserve the car, that you can have the car, you have the capacity to get the car, in that example, you know, is the beginning of it.
Okay, and I suppose now I want to pull it towards tools and tips. That's why I love chatting to people on the podcast. I get to pick their brains for our listeners, which is great. In terms of positive habits and that kind of toolkit and training positive habits, talk to me about adversity and when things go wrong, getting those habits back into that kind of mindset of getting back into positive habit structures, getting kind of, you know, when you have a tough week or a tough day, and the really easy thing is to get all the negative habits back into your life. What tips and tools have you got to keep people on track in that way?
Well, I would say that one of the tools that I use and share with my clients is called a positive pause technique. And really it's about between stimulus and response, there is a space. And that's a Viktor Frankl quote you may have heard as well. And in that space is your freedom. So for example, when you're talking about adversity, challenges, stress, all the responsibilities that people can have, the difficulties people can have, it's about like, I love to visualize it in terms of if you imagine, Karl, you're watching yourself on a screen like you are right now, but you have the ability to just press pause. And that is where you use the breath, and the breath is the most important tool we have in terms of bringing ourselves into the moment. So you take a deep breath, and you simply, I know people if are listening to this won't be able to see, but what I'm doing is I'm just taking my thumb and my forefinger together. So it's like a pause button. So you take a deep breath, fill up your lungs, and just place your fingers together. And then it's like, you can imagine the screen freezing, and you slowly exhale. And your whole nervous system starts to calm down. Your whole parasympathetic is activated. And now you're in a position of strength to choose how you're going to respond to the trigger. So knowing your triggers, knowing what it is that really causes you to feel, out of balance, causes you to feel stress. For many people, it's like first thing in the morning, getting the kids ready to school. That can be a trigger for many people, because it's like, how am I going to get them out? I have to go to a meeting. I've got a Zoom at, 9 o'clock. The kids are, can't find their shoes. And it's the ability to actually navigate those times from a place of calmness, from a place of empowerment, as opposed to feeling that you're overwhelmed and that you're reacting to the situation. So the positive pause technique, and that is you can find, for anyone who's interested, they can find that on my, it's a 5-star online program called The Positive Habit, that is free for everyone and has been since the beginning of the pandemic. And that, I teach that technique on the course. So it's there for people. And I use it myself. Like it's hilarious, because sometimes I don't even realize, but I got my thumb and my forefinger together, and I'm like, oh, okay, so there's something there that is, could be stressing me out. And so it becomes very subconscious. It becomes a tool that you're accessing on a subconscious level. And that's what you want. So it's not taking so much effort from your conscious mind.
And that's something we're seeing more and more. The more experts that we chat to across the globe, from James Nestor to all the other experts that we've chatted to, breathing is almost back in fashion in some respects. I'm not sure it ever left fashion, but if everyone's talking about it, and that whole kind of pause and breathe technique, it really does. It's a similar version of it that we get from different people, but it just shows how powerful it is as a technique, and how simple it is as a technique, that it really can improve your mood. It really can help you build on positive habits. That's simple, just breathing and breathing in, breathing out for 3 seconds, 4 seconds, or 5 seconds can really change your approach and change your decision making for the better.
100%, yeah. And like James says, it's the nasal breathing that is actually most effective. And, I love his work, and it's so important. And I think that you're right. It is something that we're hearing a lot of, but it's actually acknowledging, I think what's so important, and people forget to do, and I work with my clients on this basis, is to acknowledge the times where you did use it. Because when you acknowledge your progress, you're much more likely to continue to make it. So for example, the morning that you didn't shout at the kids and that you did actually pause and stop, sit with that, really allow yourself to soak that in and congratulate yourself. And that is self-love. Again, that's self-care. It's acknowledging your progress. So journaling that down, today I actually did stop, pause, and to notice the difference. What is the difference on yourself? In terms of physically, because anxiety is such a physical condition. What is the difference in terms of your children, your family around you? How did that feel? And then let that soak in, because then it becomes something. That's the reward, which is like but the science of habits is that we're looking for the reward always. So when you can see that's the reward is, my kids skip off to school as opposed to, go off sulking, or, that tension that can be there. And there's the reward. So I think that's such a big part of it, is to acknowledge it when you do it. And when you don't do it, let's face it, there's all those times where we don't, is then again to be kind to yourself. Awareness, you notice that you didn't do it. That's progress too,
Everyone loves to see progression. That is for sure. And it's a really good reminder for people in terms of habit forming and building more positive habits stop, pause, but also journal and see the difference that pause makes, which is fantastic. Fiona, it's been great to catch up today. Remind me where people can find you and remind us of your books.
Yeah, absolutely. So thepositivehabit.com is where people can access the online course. My first book is The Positive Habit. It's available in all bookstores. And my new book, The Self-Love Habit, will be published with Gill Books in February 21. And you can also find me on Instagram. So that's where you can get more of my work.
Fantastic. Well, Fiona, at the very start of the interview, before we came on, you said, I'm sending sunshine your way. It was pouring rain. I didn't quite believe you. As I look outside now, we have sunshine. So fair play.
Wow, you see, there you go. There's an exact example. The power of visualization. Yeah.
Of course. Well, listen, it's been great to catch up with you, and the very best of luck with the books, and we'll see you soon. Folks, I really hope you enjoyed today's episode with Fiona Brennan. Really simple tips there, really simple tools. Put them into practice and increase the amount of positive habits in your day. As ever, you know where we are. Real Health at independent.ie, at Karl Henry PT on Twitter and on Instagram. And we'll see you for more Real Health next week. Have a great week. We'll see you soon.
Leia Healthcare, looking after you always. Proud sponsors of Real Health with Karl Henry.